You can lose everything even if you do everything right. You can grind for years, budget, stay employed, avoid risky moves, and still watch your life get smaller while someone else's life gets bigger. And here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. Most people are not defeated by bad luck. They are defeated by the system training them to think and react in the exact wrong way. This is not financial advice. This is financial education. In 2026, the rules feel stranger than ever. AI is replacing middle-class jobs faster than anyone predicted. Inflation may look calmer on paper, but your paycheck still buys less than it did in 2019. Housing has detached from wages in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, so working harder quietly became a myth. Meanwhile, the stock market keeps printing new highs. The top 1% owns more than ever, and the average person is trying to decide whether to pay rent, buy groceries, or cover one more medical bill. So in this video, I am going to give you the dark truth behind why money freedom looks like a distant dream for most people and like an inevitable outcome for a few. You will learn why positive thinking is not what makes the difference. You will learn why the best opportunities often arrive disguised as disasters. And you will learn a practical mental framework for surviving the pressure, avoiding emotional traps, and building leverage when the world is trying to push you into permanent weakness. Before we go any further, I want you to picture a scenario. You are doing your best. You have a job. Maybe you even got promoted. Then the company announces a restructuring. They do not call it layoffs, they call it optimization. Overnight, your role disappears, and you are told to transition into something else. You look for similar work. You find job postings that require 5 years of experience and AI literacy. You apply anyway. You get a rejection email, then another. Then you stop feeling angry and start feeling ashamed. Now picture something else. A man or woman in the same city, with the same economy outside their window, suddenly gets a huge break after a disaster. Maybe their business fails, or they lose a job, or they get sued, or they get cut from a project, and then, somehow, their name starts showing up in conversations that used to feel closed to them. They get introduced to investors, they get access to suppliers, they find a new market earlier than everyone else. Their finances do not recover slowly, they recover violently. Not because they are more talented in some magical way, it is because they interpret the same pain differently, and in 2026, interpretation is everything. Because the tools you use to survive are not just financial, they are psychological. Your mind is the first investment account, and most people are depositing emotions, not strategy. Let me say the uncomfortable thing clearly. A lot of people live like their life is a punishment. They experience a setback, and they assume the setback is proof that they are broken, unlucky, or cursed. They turn fear into a personality, and then they make decisions that lock them into the exact outcomes they dread. In contrast, the people who accumulate wealth through storms tend to treat fear like weather. They do not deny it. They do not dramatize it. They look at it, plan around it, and move. They understand a rule that sounds simple but is deadly in practice. Money is not mainly produced by effort. Money is produced by the ability to keep your decisions from being hijacked. Now let us go deeper, because the first lie almost everyone learns about money is that scarcity is moral. That if you struggle, you must have done something wrong. If you are poor, it must mean you deserve it. But that story collapses the moment you look at the mechanics. In modern economies, wages are pressured upward slower than asset prices. The Federal Reserve can cut rates or raise them, but the real impact on ordinary people is not abstract. It shows up as debt service, credit tightening, rent increases, and the cost of insurance when climate-driven disasters start turning once in a lifetime into every few years. And when the Fed tightens, it is not just the bond market that moves. It is your ability to refinance. It is your ability to borrow for a car. It is your ability to make it through a gap between jobs without using a credit card at brutal interest. And then, once you are trapped, the system starts selling you the same comfort over and over. Save more. Work harder. Learn to code. Hustle. Build passive income. Start a side business. In 2020, learn to code sounded like a plan. In 2026, AI systems can generate code, debug faster, and produce entire feature sets with less friction than most junior employees can deliver. That does not mean technology is bad. It means the promise you were sold was designed to keep you busy, not free. Busy is profitable for the people who own the platforms. You are not crazy for feeling like the world is closing around you. The data supports it. Wealth concentration keeps accelerating. According to widely cited analyses using Federal Reserve data, the top 1% owns a historically large share of total wealth. When wealth is concentrated, bargaining power becomes concentrated. It affects wages, it affects investment access, and it affects political influence. The wealthy do not just have more money, they have more options. And here is where the story gets truly ugly. When you have fewer options, you react with panic. Panic creates bad moves. Bad moves create permanent losses. Permanent losses create dependency. Dependency is the real product, not your labor, your dependence. Let me give you a micro story. Imagine a 32-year-old nurse named David. He works shifts, he does overtime when he can. He has a small savings account and a big health insurance bill waiting in the background like a shadow. When inflation spiked, his groceries and his rent rose. He did the adult thing. He cut subscriptions. He cooked at home. He tried to stretch. Then his landlord sends a notice. Rent goes up again. David calls the office. They say everyone's rent is adjusting. Then his car breaks. He needs repairs, but credit is expensive because interest rates stayed high enough for too long. His balance rises. He pays minimums. Minimums become a lifestyle. And then he hears about crypto and freedom from banks. He opens an account, buys a small amount, hoping it will help later. In 2026, the harsh reality is this. Retail crypto still exists, but the major infrastructure is dominated by institutions and regulated exchanges. Many of the big winners are not people like David. They are funds, market makers, and corporate players with better access, better custody, and better ability to withstand volatility. So David watches his small positions swing wildly while his real life becomes more stable in the worst way. More bills, more debt, more anxiety. This is not because David is lazy, it is because his financial system is being managed by forces he cannot see, and you can feel it because the stress is physical. You sleep worse, you rush decisions, you start bargaining with yourself. Maybe you skip a payment, maybe you delay medical care, maybe you take a risk that is not designed for survival. Now let us talk about the second lie, the one that keeps people trapped after the first disaster. The lie is that a setback is random and final. Most people think bankruptcy ends you. Job loss means you are done. A breakup means love is impossible. A medical diagnosis means the future is ruined. And to be fair, the pain is real. It is just that the interpretation is optional. There is a reason the wealthy treat disasters like doors instead of walls. It is not spirituality. It is not mysticism. It is pattern recognition. Think about how opportunities actually appear in capitalist reality. They rarely show up as invitations from the universe. They show up when something breaks. When a company fails, assets get sold. When industries consolidate, suppliers get desperate. When regulations change, gaps open for people who can move faster than the slow institutions. When interest rate expectations shift, financing structures get renegotiated. But the key is emotional. When you are emotionally hijacked by failure, you cannot move quickly. You freeze, or you lash out, or you seek easy comfort in things that do not create leverage. You turn to propaganda that feels good. You join communities that sell certainty. You chase trends in social media that look like money but are really attention. Now, in 2026, social media has become a factory for financial fantasy. The creator economy is full of motivational reels, passive income videos, and I got rich while you slept stories. The truth is brutal. Most creators make $0 or close to it. Most of the wealth produced by content goes to the platforms and to the minority of entertainers who hit the algorithm jackpot. For the average person, content is not a wealth machine, it is a treadmill, and yet people still chase it because it offers the only thing they crave after a setback, the feeling of agency. The feeling that they can control the outcome by changing their identity. But identity without strategy is just a new costume. So if you have been following the advice you were given and it still feels like you are drowning, you are not failing at life. You are failing at the specific mental model you were taught. Here is the model the wealthy tend to operate on, whether they admit it or not. Your life is not a straight line. It is a series of stages. Each stage has a boss, a problem that blocks progress. In games, you cannot reach the next level until you beat the boss or you become stuck at that level forever. Most people carry the same boss into every stage of real life. They do not learn. They repeat, they avoid, they complain, they blame, and the boss stays. Let me tell you what a boss looks like in real money terms. Sometimes it is your debt. Sometimes it is your lack of emergency reserves. Sometimes it is your career narrative that no longer fits the market. Sometimes it is your credit score. Sometimes it is your family obligations. Sometimes it is even your health. And when you avoid it, it does not disappear. It compounds. In 2026, debt compounding is not theoretical. Credit is still expensive when rates are not low, and many people are relying on revolving credit. If you miss a payment, your credit score can take a hit that makes the next loan worse. If you get a new job, the gap in your history becomes a penalty. And if you are in a housing market detached from wages, moving costs and rent increases mean that you are one accident away from instability. So the first practical question is simple and uncomfortable. What is your current boss? What problem are you postponing because it hurts to look at it? Most people refuse to look. They keep scrolling, they keep buying, they keep promising themselves that tomorrow will be different, but tomorrow arrives with the same math, only more expensive. Now the third lie comes after you notice you are stuck. The lie is that the solution is a single heroic decision. Most self-help tells you to find the right mindset, then everything will open. In reality, the solutions are boring and brutal at first. You have to cut losses. You have to stop feeding what is draining you. You have to restructure how you earn and how you protect. When you hear cut losses, your brain might panic, because you associate loss with failure. But in rational strategy, loss is information. Loss is a signal. It tells you which assumptions were wrong. Here is where people break. They do not treat bad outcomes as data. They treat bad outcomes as identity. They say, I am a loser. Or they say, I am cursed. Or they say, I am too late. That is not analysis. That is self-harm dressed as philosophy. The wealthy usually do not do that. They get uncomfortable and they adjust. If a project fails, they reassess. If a trade goes wrong, they define an exit. If a hiring plan was wrong, they change the plan. It is not kindness, it is discipline. You can see this discipline even in the way institutions behave during market stress. When markets move quickly, the people with liquidity do not panic. They rebalance, they exploit volatility, they buy what others are forced to sell. But if you are stuck without liquidity, you cannot exploit anything. You can only survive. And this is where the Federal Reserve enters your story again, because Fed policy shapes liquidity conditions. When rates are held high or when policy stays restrictive, financing tightens. That can slow hiring, reduce consumer spending, and increase the cost of carrying inventory. It also increases the value of cash relative to risk for a period of time. So people without reserves feel it first. Now connect that to AI disruption. When companies cut roles or reduce headcount, they often do so by replacing tasks with automation. The person who gets laid off is usually not the person who gets the profits from the automation. The profits flow to shareholders and owners. In other words, AI can shift income upward while pushing stability downward. So you get a double squeeze. Your job market becomes less forgiving, and your cash becomes less powerful. And then, when you finally feel hopeless, social media sells you the idea of one weird trick to become rich. That trick is usually attention farming, or it is a community that tells you to ignore risk, or it is crypto or options or some new scheme dressed as empowerment. The goal is always the same: keep you in the loop so you do not leave long enough to learn real leverage. Now we are at the point where the original script of many financial stories would tell you to meditate and trust the universe. I am not going to waste your time with empty spirituality. Meditation can help with emotional regulation. But emotional regulation is only useful if it changes your decisions. So let us translate the idea into something you can actually use at midnight when your brain is screaming. When markets crash or when your business struggles, your body reacts before your mind can analyze. Your stress response wants speed, it wants revenge, it wants certainty, it wants you to act now. But acting now during uncertainty is one of the fastest ways to turn a manageable problem into a permanent disaster. This is why disciplined people pause. They do not pause forever. They pause long enough to remove emotion from the decision. Here is an example, and I want you to keep it in your head. Suppose you bought an investment and it drops sharply. Your first impulse is to either sell immediately or buy more to average down. If you do that in panic, you may break your own plan. If you sell because of fear, you lock in losses. If you average down without a strategy, you increase exposure and risk. That can turn a temporary dip into a financial injury. A disciplined approach is not magical. It is conditional. It asks one question first. Is the decision wrong, or is the timing just bad? If your analysis was wrong, you cut the loss. You do not argue with reality. You update. If your analysis was right but the market is noisy, you give it room. And you only give it room within predefined risk boundaries. That is the difference between surviving volatility and feeding it. Now, you might think this is only about investing. It is not. This same emotional trap happens with job decisions, with business expenses, with romantic decisions, with credit card use, with buying a house you cannot afford, with keeping a job that is shrinking your future. The boss is not just money. The boss is your impulse to self-soothe with denial. And here is where the understanding turns darker. Because while you are fighting your impulses, other people are optimizing systems around your impulses. The top 1% does not need to be smarter than you in some generic way. They need to be positioned to extract value when you are stressed. That means they benefit from your lack of time. It means they design products with friction. It means they profit from late fees, from high interest, from confusing credit terms, from predatory marketing, and from subscription traps. In 2026, it also means they benefit from your distraction. They sell you fantasies about passive income so you do not demand real wages. They sell you learn to code so you do not question why your job is disappearing. They sell you AI will create opportunities so you do not notice that the opportunities mostly show up for those who already have capital, access, and networks. So yes, there is a spiritual layer to your life if you want one, but there is also a mechanical layer, and the mechanical layer is unforgiving. Now let us talk about retirement, because it is the biggest delayed disaster most people are avoiding. Social Security is under pressure from an aging population, many pension systems are underfunded, companies shift risk to individuals, and the retirement narrative keeps changing. The retirement age keeps moving, benefits get adjusted, people are told to work longer, save more, invest wisely, and trust that the future will be stable. But stability is not the same as affordability. In many places, health costs are rising and insurance markets are collapsing after climate-driven disasters. That means the expense side of retirement is not waiting for you to get ready. It is accelerating. So what happens when you are behind on retirement and you are also behind on housing and you are also facing job automation? You start doing the math indirectly. You say, if I can just get a good year, I will catch up. But the system is designed to make catching up difficult. This is why you should stop worshiping motivation. You need structure. Structure means you know what you will do when something goes wrong. It means you know your risk tolerance before you feel fear. It means you know how you will reduce spending if your income drops. It means you know the minimum money you need for survival. It means you keep records. It means you build an emergency buffer, even if it is small at first. And yes, it means you stop pretending that your future depends on vibes. The fourth lie people believe is that wealth is primarily moral, that if you are a good person, money will come. In reality, wealth often comes from leverage and timing. Wealth often comes from access to deals. Wealth often comes from being able to survive long enough to benefit from cycles. In other words, the wealthy are not simply lucky, they are resilient. They absorb shocks that would destroy you. They can wait, they can negotiate, they can diversify, and they can take calculated risk because their baseline survival is already covered. So if you want a real goal, it is not get rich, it is buy resilience, buy time, buy optionality. Optionality is the opposite of panic. Now we need to connect this to crypto and institutional takeover, because the fantasy cycle keeps repeating. Crypto was marketed as freedom from banks, freedom from censorship, freedom from gatekeepers. But in 2026, the largest influence often comes from regulated institutions and institutional custody. You can still use crypto, but the landscape is not the rebellious playground it was promised to be. Liquidity flows to the players with infrastructure. Retail investors often get the volatility without the power. And you know what volatility does to most people? It breaks discipline. It turns long-term into gambling. It turns savings into revenge trades. It turns uncertainty into emotional spending. So even when crypto works for someone, it often does not work for the average person because the average person cannot tolerate drawdowns. That brings us to the real psychological boss. The boss is not your lack of intelligence. It is your lack of tolerance for temporary pain. Wealth often requires you to endure periods where you look poor, where your progress is invisible, where you feel like nothing is working. But if you are trained to want immediate relief, you will abandon the process